"Get off the bench, you monkey. You don't belong here." The words sliced through the courtroom like a jagged blade, echoing off the cold, sterile walls. The voice belonged to Officer Daniels, a burly man with a sneer that could curdle milk. Marcus sat tall, his robes a stark contrast to the ugliness unfolding before him. His dark skin glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, his jaw clenched so tight it could have shattered stone. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Marcus was the unwilling general. The officers, Daniels and his partner, Officer Harris, stood before him, their smug grins a stark reminder of the power they wielded. "You think you're better than us, huh?" Harris spat, his voice a low growl. "Sitting up there in your fancy robes, acting like you're somebody? But we know the truth. You're just enough." Marcus's voice boomed, cutting through the tension like a thunderclap. The room fell silent, the weight of his authority momentarily silencing the hate. Marcus's mind raced. He thought of his father, a man who had worked himself to the bone only to be spat on by the world. He thought of his mother, who had taught him to rise above the hate, to never let them see you sweat. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the steps. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to his pain. He felt like a ghost, invisible, insignificant. The days turned into weeks, and the incident in the courtroom became a distant memory for everyone but Marcus. The officers were reprimanded, but it was a slap on the wrist, a mere formality. One night, after another silent dinner, Marcus finally confronted her. "Sarah, what's going on? Talk to me." She hesitated, her eyes avoiding his. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Marcus. The constant battles, the hate, the stress. It's too much. I feel like I'm losing myself." And just like that, she was gone. The house felt emptier without her, the silence deafening. Marcus tried to focus on work, on Lily, on anything that could distract him from the pain. The final blow came from the one place Marcus had always felt safe, the bench. A high-profile case landed on his desk, one that could make or break his career. When the verdict came in, it was a slap in the face. Not guilty. The defendant, a wealthy businessman with a history of corruption, walked free, his smug grin a mirror image of the officers who had humiliated Marcus weeks before. "Daddy, why do people hate you?" she asked one night, her innocent eyes filled with confusion. But then the letter arrived. It was a simple envelope, addressed in a child's handwriting. Marcus almost didn't open it, assuming it was just another piece of junk mail. "Dear Judge Thompson, my name is Jamal. I was in the courtroom that day when those officers said those mean things to you. I saw how they treated you, and I saw how you didn't let them break you." Marcus read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his soul. His hands trembled as he held the paper, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. That night, he sat alone in the living room, the letter resting on the coffee table. The house was quiet, but for the first time the silence didn't feel oppressive. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. He started small, rebuilding the routines that had once grounded him. He made breakfast for Lily, something he hadn't done since Sarah left. He also began to reconnect with his work, but this time it was different. He wasn't just going through the motions, trying to prove himself to a world that seemed determined to tear him down. One evening, as he was packing up after a long day at the center, a young woman approached him. She couldn't have been more than 20, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Marcus listened as she told him her story, his heart breaking for the young woman who had been thrust into a world she didn't understand. "I'll help you," he said when she finished. "We'll figure this out together." As Marcus walked home that night, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. He was making a difference not because he had to, but because he wanted to. But the journey was far from over. The road to redemption was long and fraught with challenges, and Marcus knew there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face them. He had been knocked down, but he wasn't out. And as long as he had breath in his body, he would keep fighting, for justice, for his family, and for himself. The spark that Jamal's letter had ignited was growing into a flame, and Marcus was determined to let it light the way forward. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The days turned into weeks, and Marcus's life began to shift in ways he hadn't thought possible. The spark that Jamal's letter had ignited was now a steady flame, guiding him through the darkness that had once consumed him. He threw himself into his work at the community center, finding solace in the faces of those who came to him for help. Each case, each story was a reminder of why he had become a judge in the first place, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. One case in particular consumed him. It was the case of a young black man named Darius, who had been accused of armed robbery. The evidence was flimsy at best, a grainy surveillance video and a witness who had changed their story 3 times. But the prosecution was relentless, determined to secure a conviction. Marcus saw himself in Darius, saw the same pain and frustration he had felt when the system had turned its back on him. He knew he couldn't let this boy become another statistic. The trial was grueling. The prosecution painted Darius as a thug, a menace to society, while Marcus fought to humanize him, to show the jury the young man behind the accusations. He called witnesses who testified to Darius's character, who spoke of his kindness, his dreams, his potential. He cross-examined the prosecution's witnesses, exposing the inconsistencies in their stories. And through it all, he kept his focus on Darius, on the boy who had been failed by the system but still had the courage to hope. When the verdict came in, Marcus held his breath. The jury foreman stood, his voice steady as he read the words that would change Darius's life. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers, but Marcus's eyes were on Darius. The young man's face was a mixture of relief and disbelief, tears streaming down his cheeks as he turned to Marcus. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in me." Marcus placed a hand on Darius's shoulder, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You did this," he said firmly. "You stood tall even when the world tried to knock you down. Never forget that." As Marcus left the courtroom that day, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. He had made a difference not just for Darius but for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. And with each step, he felt the weight of his past burdens lifting, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. But the journey wasn't over. The road to redemption was long and fraught with challenges, and Marcus knew there would be setbacks along the way. He had learned that the hard way. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. Sarah had started to come around, her walls slowly crumbling as she saw the changes in him. They weren't back to where they had been, but they were moving forward, one step at a time. Lily, too, had noticed the difference in her father. She no longer asked why people hated him. Instead, she asked about the people he helped, her eyes wide with admiration. "Daddy, you're like a superhero," she said one night as he tucked her into bed. "You help people when no one else will." Marcus smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Im no suparu, suathart. I'm just doing what's right." "That's what makes you a superhero," she replied, her voice filled with the innocence of a child who still believed in the goodness of the world. Her words stayed with him long after she had fallen asleep, a reminder of why he couldn't give up. He had a daughter who looked up to him, a wife who was slowly learning to trust him again, and a community that needed him. He couldn't let them down. One evening, as Marcus was preparing to leave the community center, he received a call from an unexpected source, Officer Daniels. The man who had humiliated him, who had tried to break him, was now asking for his help. "Judge Thompson," Daniels began his. The call from Officer Daniels was like a thunderclap in the quiet storm of Marcus's life. The man who had once stood in his courtroom, spewing venom and hatred, now sounded broken, desperate. "Judge Thompson," Daniels began, his voice trembling, I need your help. I'm being framed and I don't know who else to turn to." Marcus sat in stunned silence, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. His first instinct was to hang up, to let Daniels face the consequences of his actions. But then he thought of Jamal's letter, of the young boy who had seen him stand tall in the face of humiliation. He thought of Darius, of the countless others who had been failed by the system. And he realized that this wasn't just about Daniels, it was about justice, about doing what was right even when it was hard. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, his voice steady. Daniel's story spilled out in a rush of words. He had been set up, he claimed, by a group of corrupt officers who were involved in a drug trafficking ring. When he had tried to expose them, they turned on him, planting evidence to make it look like he was the one behind it all. "I know I don't deserve your help," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "But I'm begging you. Please." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. Helping Daniels would mean putting himself back in the crosshairs of the very system that had tried to destroy him. It would mean facing the people who had humiliated him, who had laughed at his pain. But it would also mean standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. "I'll take your case," Marcus said finally. "But understand this, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." The trial was the most challenging of Marcus's career. The prosecution painted Daniels as a rogue cop, a man who had betrayed the badge. The media had a field day, dredging up every mistake Daniels had ever made, every rumor, every accusation. But Marcus fought back, exposing the corruption that ran deep within the department. He called witnesses who testified to the threats they had received, the bribes they had been offered. He presented evidence that had been buried, ignored, or dismissed. And then the plot twist no one saw coming. During cross-examination, Marcus called the lead investigator to the stand. The man was confident, smug even as he recounted the evidence against Daniels. But Marcus had done his homework. He had uncovered a series of text messages between the investigator and one of the corrupt officers. Messages that proved the investigator had been in on the setup from the beginning. "Isn't it true," Marcus asked, his voice calm but cutting, "that you conspired with Officer Harris to frame Officer Daniels?" The investigator's face turned pale, his confidence crumbling. I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus didn't flinch. He handed the text messages to the judge, who read them in silence before turning to the investigator. "You're under oath," the judge said sternly. "Answer the question." The investigator hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally he broke. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We set him up." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Daniels sat in stunned silence, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. Marcus stood tall, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. He had done it. He had exposed the truth not just for Daniels but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. When the verdict came in, it was a victory not just for Daniels but for justice itself. The corrupt officers were arrested, their crimes exposed for the world to see. Daniels was exonerated, his name cleared, but the scars of his ordeal would remain. He approached Marcus after the trial, his eyes filled with gratitude and regret. "I don't know how to thank you," Daniels said, his voice trembling. "After everything I did, you didn't have to help me." Marcus looked at him, his expression firm but not unkind. "This wasn't about you," he said. "It was about doing what's right. But if you really want to thank me, use this second chance to make a difference. Be better." Daniels nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise." As Marcus left the courthouse that day, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The pain, the humiliation, the rejection, it had all led him here. It had made him stronger, wiser, more determined. And it had shown him that no matter how dark the world seemed, there was always a way to rise above it. Sarah was waiting for him outside, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Marcus smiled, pulling her into his arms. "We did it," he corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you." Lily ran up to them, her face glowing with excitement. "Daddy, you're a hero," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. Marcus laughed, lifting her into the air. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice filled with love. "I'm just a man who believes in doing what's right." As they walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand, Marcus felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he could face it. He had his family, his purpose, and the unwavering belief that no matter how hard the world tried to knock him down, he would always stand tall. And in that moment, Marcus Thompson wasn't just a judge. He was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of hope. He was proof that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could shine brighter than the sun. And as long as he had breath in his body, he would keep fighting, for justice, for his family, and for a world where no one had to face the storm alone.